We'll call this to order. Welcome to the May meeting of the Assembly of the Ethics and Elections Committee meeting. And we can start with some introductions.
Forrest Dunbar.
Amanda Moser.
David Nesbitt from Board of Ethics.
Lisa Slusner.
Dick Train.
Jackie Abel.
And I'm Pete Peterson. So we'll start with some new business. How about the ethics training recap from the retreat?
I was telling him, I think it went well.
Yeah,
I was
I
very
hadn't been to
impressed
one
with it.
before. I'd never been to an ethics training to a retreat before, but I was hoping that our time was useful for you and that we were able to consider that a valuable use of your time, I hope.
And I think too, to gather if there was something that you still need
Sure.
more,
Yeah.
any subject that you want the board to take a look at.
That's right. I mean, we
maybe.
kind of skimmed over it. If there's something else that we can follow up on, we'd be happy to provide you with more materials or anything else that you might need.
Just from my perspective, you did the best thing possible. Reduce the size
Right.
of the ethics ordinance down from 55 pages to 17, I think. That was remarkable.
Well, I think it was a really good introduction for the new members. I don't think we had any much near that amount of detail of training when I was a new guy, and so I think that was good. I'm sure they gathered a lot of knowledge from, and then there were a number of questions as well, and there were also questions in our Jeopardy attempt at the end there.
We played a game at
Oh,
the end
okay.
and we had some key
very good.
It
ethics
was actually
questions.
kind of fun.
Well, I thought
Amanda's really good for doing that.
Well, the discussion was I thought great. I mean, I enjoyed the questions that we had, and it was a very intelligent conversation. I enjoyed it, and primarily, what reducing it to 17 pages kind of puts the assembly back in the position of using its own discretion, its own judgment, which is what you're hired to do. And so, I think that's a really good move for the ethics, as opposed to trying to over-legislate it.
And the fact that we emphasized that if you don't know, it's better to ask first,
Right.
type of a thing.
And to let people know we're available to
Right.
help in any way.
Right.
That's right. Just ask. Yeah, very good.
So I think that was good, and something we should probably plan on continuing whenever a couple of years from now, when we potentially have some new members. So
No, very good. Is there anything else that I can help you with today before I scoot?
No, I just appreciate the fact how you guys handle complaints, because it used to be somebody would file a complaint against a sitting assembly member or mayor when they were wanting to run against him.
Mm-hmm.
And they would get that out in the public. Oh, there's an ethics been filed against them. As if you were guilty automatically.
It
But
was
then you
used as
guys
a tool.
changed that, or we changed it. Now, if you say you've charged somebody with ethics violation, they drop the case. So we did get that out of politics, because that was a tool used for a long time.
Yeah.
But you do contact the member if there's been any complaint filed against them, whether you think it has any merit to it at all.
Yes, but it remains confidential,
Right.
and until it's
Unless they've agreed
unless
to make
it's
it
waived.
public.
That's right. So I think that was deliberately, because I think it had in the past been used as a tool before my time, but I'd heard of that happening.
You weren't on the body when that happened.
No,
And that happens in legislative races regularly. Anytime they think they have something, they run to APOC and try to get it publicized.
APOC complaint filed against you.
Oh, yeah.
Got you.
So,
And
Yes.
I would just let you know that the website, the Board of Ethics website, has been updated. All of the forms are there. If you go there you can go there for the code, because the code has not yet been codified, and so we've got a link on the website to the actual ordinance so that people can reference the code until it takes place on muni.org. And the other thing would be is that now we would like all of the assembly to file that disclosure of economic interest. The requirement now is upon commencement and acquisition. And so just because we're not doing the annual one, we kind of like to have all of the assembly members
current.
And then that would be the only one that you would have to do.
Has this group done it before? Has anybody done it?
This one went back to the time where we tried to get everyone to sign one, and because of the APOC requirement, nobody wanted to do it. And so we don't have disclosure forms for you all.
Oh, okay.
So,
So you're talking about financial disclosure?
Right.
economic interest. And it's just with the municipality. So if you have no business with the municipality, it's a really easy form. You just check
Check a
neither,
box.
and then you're on file. So,
Give me the form, Lisa.
okay.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, so if I put those in mailboxes, will that work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to think too, what's our current business? Do we have any current advisory opinion requests? Or
We do from the port director.
That's right. That's outstanding. Anything else we have going on?
We're reviewing forms.
Right, okay.
and-
All right, so those are the
we've
big
got-
ones, yeah.
I've asked for a meeting on what was discussed at the retreat,
Right.
but it hasn't gelled into an explicit advisory
Okay.
opinion yet. So
Okay.
we'll see what comes of talking about it.
Okay. No, we'll expect to see that.
I did send it by email, and
I have it.
You have it? Do you have it?
Okay.
Anyway, so that should be in the process of.
Okay.
And then I'm thinking that we can just handle that by inviting you to our next meeting, and
Yeah.
then you all can have an
We can
informal
just talk about it.
conversation.
Yeah, I attached all the things that got filed, or the backup from Mr. Kim's thing, and with a brief explanation, so you guys can have all the backup, and we can talk about
Okay.
what I did right or wrong, what we should do in the future, what rules need to be changed, what else.
Perfect. Okay. Is it
For the record, I wanted to note that Mr. Croft joined us a minute ago.
Yeah. Is it a confidential matter right now?
No, I mean, it's
Oh,
all
okay.
new, so,
Okay. Not that I'm going to go talk about it, I'm just wondering for our next meeting.
yeah, so Mr. Kim, Korean American gentleman who had filed a late valuation appeal. And I helped him figure out that they'd sent the green card to the wrong place and said, you should reconsider his. And so I said at the beginning, I'm not representing him for compensation. He's a constituent. But Dee articulated at the retreat some concerns about even non-paid representation in this
Oh, I see.
sense of, I don't know, undue influence, or I don't think valuations ever get to the assembly again. I think it's an area that doesn't go to them anymore. But it would be more problematic in things that are at a lower level but would eventually get to the assembly. Anyway, that kind of thing. Is there something undue influency about that? My intention was once, because he just got horribly confused about why he got rejected and he did what people asked him. Part of it's a language barrier, but once he got to the actual merits of his valuation, which they refused to consider, I was going to let him handle it. But getting through the why it should be reconsidered and why he missed the late date, yeah. So I
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good.
All right. I think you're free to go.
Okay, sounds good.
That's
It's good to see you.
Thanks for
All right,
coming.
should be in here.
So let's move on to item B, the election review. Amanda?
Thank you. So I just thought give a update after the 2017 election of just some of the highs and the lows of what happened. So 2017 election, we had 49,370 cards cast. About 23.20% of registered voters were engaged in the process. This is like a slight decrease of what we've seen over recent years. We've really made a strong push since 2013 to increase voter turnout, and we have seen that last year we had about 24.75% of voters engaged in the election process, and not quite sure what attributed to the slight decline in that, but I will say, I guess I personally had anticipated that there would be a lot of engagement just because there seems to be a sort of strong civic engagement movement happening across the country. And I just had been hopeful that that would translate into people having their voice heard in our local elections. I think our local elections have such a huge impact on our day-to-day lives. In addition to the regular election, we had two special elections. We had a special election for the Turnagain Armed Police Service area and a special election for the Girdwood Valley Service Area expansion. And that created a little bit of extra work and wrinkles into that. I have to really thank our two precincts, precinct in Indian and the precinct in Girdwood, because it was a special election. They set up 2 ballot boxes, 2 AccuVote machines, and they had to run specific ballots through different machines to make sure that we were able to track both those. But we were able to run both those elections and process both that. And I think that it was really beneficial for the residents of the Turnagain Arm area along with Gerwood to have those decisions made this spring. This was our first election in our new space that we have as part of the vote by mail transition, and that was, I will say, a huge blessing and a slight curse. It was very challenging for us to move in the middle of an election. We were not able to move into the new space until about mid-February, and we had a lot of wrinkles along the way. We didn't have phone service until March 29th. We did not have internet until, there was a lot of things that sort of took a little bit longer. That being said, the new space is incredible, and we were very grateful to have it, and so thank you. I know this committee has been very supportive of the Vote by Mail project. We identified a lot of challenges being here at City Hall. We had used multiple conference rooms here in City Hall, and we had to move things around from room to room. Being in one open space, everyone was able to see across the room what was happening. We were able to manage our workers, make sure folks were on task and doing what they were supposed to be doing. We were able to identify when areas were very busy and needed extra help. One thing we've worked on the last 2 years is having an agile workforce. So people are trained in multiple different roles and able to move into different spaces depending on the workflow. And so we would identify times where our review board was very busy and our supply team would help our review board, and we were able to process ballots in a very timely fashion because we had that extra help. But we were able to manage the situation by being in the same room and seeing what was happening across the room. So although there was some challenges moving into the new space, we're very thankful to have that new space, and we think it's beneficial both to our poll-based elections, and of course it'll be very important as we transition to vote by mail. This election set up 4 secure drop boxes. Voters who requested a ballot by mail were able to use a secure drop box for their ballot return. We did a little sort of minimal outreach on those. Each voter who requested a ballot by mail received a flyer that had 2-sided flyer. On the front side it had a map of the different locations around town, and then on the back side it had a little bit more detail as to specifically where that box was on that property. We were really excited. We had over 300 voters return their ballot using those secure drop boxes, which is about 10% of voters who requested a ballot by mail. With sort of the little minimum outreach to those voters, they were able to save the cost of a first-class stamp by using those drop boxes. But the strong benefit of having those 4 drop boxes this year was we identified a team lead that's the Dropbox team lead, and she set out a crew. They established routes. They trained the crew for daily ballot pickup. They also incorporated ballot pickup from our absentee locations, which is something that we used to have other workers do, but we were able to incorporate it into that other component. And we were able to establish teams for election night, and we were able to have a successful election night where we closed the drop boxes across the city all at 8 p.m. when the polls closed. This was really great this year with only the 4 boxes, because next year as we transition we will have 12 boxes, but we have a sense of how long it takes at the drop boxes, what to anticipate at the drop boxes, and we have a core group of workers that's already trained on these procedures. And so as we expand to the 12 boxes, we will be able to transition a little bit more easily with the sort of base group knowledge, along with having a very strong team lead as part of the Dropbox crew.
Was anyone waiting in line at the 8 o'clock to drop their ballot in?
No, but that's something that we anticipate and we prepared for. So our workers that were at the different drop boxes had cards. If there was a line of cards waiting for folks to drop off, that everyone who was in line at 8 o'clock would be able to drop their ballot. And folks that arrived after 8 p.m. would be given a card that gave information about turning their ballot after 8 p.m. when the drop box is closed. So we were able to hone in on those procedures and really make sure we had strong.
Dick?
How would the observers do in the new location?
That's a great question. So having this new open floor space really and developing procedures for our space, we were able to utilize we've used this colored lanyard system for the last couple of years, but now when we are in the new space, observers are able to come in, they're able to sign in on the form, and they're also able to sign a confidentiality agreement. They're given the appropriate lanyard, and then they're able to walk into the space. A lot of our observers that came this year are observers who have been with us through other elections and had really positive feedback about the new space, about being able to see what was happening across the room. They made jokes about, oh, we don't have to figure out which conference room on which floor to go in to see which process. They were just able to see everything across the way. And so we had really strong positive feedback from our observers, both about sort of the open, transparent election process that we have down at that space, but then also being able to come into the space and see what's happening. And so a lot of good feedback.
So they write down the information, so as we move to complete vote by mail, because we're going to have probably more ballots coming, of course, we're going to have more observers, so you know how to get everything organized now.
Being in this space this year really allowed us to identify how to have procedures on a small scale. So we only had a handful of observers this year, but we were able to develop and hone those procedures so that as we transition and potentially are going to have more observers, we will know how to accommodate that. And we continue to improve the space to accommodate our observers too. So we are, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we talk about vote by mail, but our space is designed for our open, transparent election process to allow the public to come in and see how we are processing their ballots.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
So, and, you know, as we get more experience with the new center and more elections, standard operating procedures would become more normalized, and so the workers will be more attuned as to exactly how everything is supposed to flow. So you got to start somewhere, and so this is where it was.
Absolutely. And we, at the end of our election, we did sort of a rehash with all of our workers, and we got a lot of great feedback from our workers about things that we can do to improve the process over next year. And we've really focused the last couple of years on training our poll workers. We have, over 650 election workers that go out on election day, and we've really revamped our training program and continue to make improvements to that. But we really recognize the opportunity to make sure that we have that same sort of robust training program for our workers that are at the election center. We do provide some training, but we're going to provide a more comprehensive training next year, and comprehensive training on all of the different tasks that happen, so folks are cross-trained and able to have that agile workforce, but not even cross-trained, but just to understand the entire process of what happens from, A to B or A to Z or soup to nuts or whatever. So,
Mr. Dunbar.
I just had a quick question going back to the Dropbox. Do we have any incidents? Did anybody vandalize them? And anybody put anything inside them?
Any Big Macs shoved in it or
Anything like that?
anything?
we did not have any vandalism. We had at one point thought that there was some dents to the outside of the box, and we had been concerned that somebody had done that. But then when we went back and we looked at all the drop boxes, we saw that they occurred in the same location, and we recognized that it happened at some point when they had been moved, that it wasn't anything that had happened at the site. But we had, and that is part of the procedures that our Dropbox crew does each time, is that they sort of check the Dropbox and both inside and outside. So, but no incidences, no.
Nobody tried to return any DVDs or anything.
So,
Or pull
And
it off the
so
truck?
next, we'll just slide right into vote by mail.
well, I have a little bit more about the 2017, if that's okay, if
sure.
I can continue. I just talked about the drop boxes. I want to talk a little bit about the AccuVote equipment. We, about 30 days before the election, we test both the AccuVote machines and the memory cards that we use on election day. As we did our testing, we identified about 10 10 AccuVote machines that we weren't able to use, and so we were able to get replacements, and we had some challenges during that testing with our memory cards additionally. As we trained our 650 election workers, we honed in on our procedures should there be challenges with the AccuVote machine, because we recognized having challenges in the past couple of elections and having challenges at ballot testing was a strong indicator that we would also have challenges on election day. And we did. We had at least a dozen between both the AccuVote machines and the memory cards fail at some point throughout the day. When that happened, all of our election workers followed the appropriate procedures, which is to use the emergency compartment of the AccuVote machine to store, or of the ballot box to store the ballots until they were able to get either a replacement AccuVote machine or a memory card. And all of those were replaced within an hour. But it is a really important conversation, and I continue to really stress this because I know we are transitioning to vote by mail. Huge part of that conversation is that aging election equipment. That election equipment was purchased in 1998. It's a piece of some electronic equipment. I do not own anything that's electronic that was purchased in 1998 in my house. And these challenges, they increase year to year. And I know we are already transitioning to vote by mail, but I just think it's important to continue to have the conversation that this is, although it is not one of the original reasons that we started the conversation about the transition, we recognize moving forward that we can't continue to use that equipment because of these challenges, and that, you know, we are really grateful that we are transitioning because of these challenges. And it's just important to continue the conversation so that folks are aware that those machines are aged, that we have problems with both the machines and the memory cards.
And probably only going to get worse as we go along. Dick?
Thanks. 2018 is going to be a mayoral election year. And so we won't be using AccuVote at all. There's no circumstance we're going to use AccuVote, or we're going to have some AccuVote machines.
Okay. As we move forward with the vote by mail transition, as we transition to vote by mail, we will not use the AccuVote machines. It is a different system
Right.
to create the ballots and to run the ballots than what we have. Should there be any sort of catastrophe that happens with the vote by mail, there might be some scenario where we have to run a poll-based election, and in that instance, I'm not sure how we would be able to do it without using the AccuVote
Just to make
machine.
sure we've got a backup plan in case vote by mail has a catastrophic failure.
No.
We still have access to from the machines from the state to use them. So hopefully we've got something built into this.
Well, so we continue to have the working relationship with the state, and so should there be some catastrophic event, or as they say on the airplanes, in the unlikely event, we still maintain that, and we have maintained all of our supplies and equipment for a poll-based election until we're completely ready to let it go for a vote by mail. So I think we recognized we thought we would be live in 2017, that it is a massive project and it's a pretty big transition and undertaking to go to it. So we are prepared to.
Are there any hot items, Amanda, as we would look to 2018 that Summit can help you with, as far as what do we need to help you solve so we can get this completely, there's no hiccups on the horizon?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I just have one other thing to talk about with the election review, and then as we talk about the vote by mail update, I can share a few things if that works for.
Sure, that's fine. Thank
Fine.
you. Continue.
So just the last thing that I want to talk about from election day, we did, I think it's really important to stress one of the challenges with our precinct-based elections is to have 122 polling locations across the city. We hire about 650 election workers, and any time you're in one of those situations where you have human beings doing stuff, you have the option for sort of humanity to come into play. So leading into election day, we had staffed up for training and had sufficient workers. We saw life happened along the way, and folks had to not work because family emergencies, illness, or anything like that. And on election day, we did have one of our election chairs who had the supplies not show up to the polling location. We heard about it shortly before 7 a.m. when the polls were supposed to open, and we set an emergency procedure into place, and Municipal Clerk Barbara Jones traveled with the appropriate ballots for that polling location and question envelopes and supplies to that polling location. She arrived at the polling location shortly after 7, around 7:20. The election workers that were there outside of the chair directed all voters to either stay at the polling location, that ballots were on the way, that they could go to another polling location within the area, or that they could come back and vote all day, that the polls were open until 8 p.m. Once Barbara arrived, they were able to process voters, and the chair arrived with all the materials after 8 p.m. or after 8 a.m., sort of closer to 8:30. And so we did have a handful of voters who were there when the polling location opened. Most of them stayed. 1 or 2 of them said that they were going to go to another polling location or come back after work. This is part of the challenges with having workers. You would hope that everyone would show up on time and be there, but life happened, and we just had one worker who did not. Once that worker arrived, they were able to set up the entire polling location within about 10 minutes and process voters using the AccuVote machine. But that happened. Our office communicated it to assembly members as it happened, and then it was also communicated. We had a lot of questions from the media, and we were very open and honest about what happened. So, and then on the end of election night, everyone returned back to our new location. We had a new procedure for that. We've really improved our procedures of supply return here over the years to really expedite that process, and we were a little bit anxious about using a new space that we would be able to get workers in and out in a timely manner. We really had a great process for the return, and we were very excited about how it happened, and we were able to get workers in and out quickly, which is very important after our workers have worked a full day. So that is my update, just sort of the highlights of 2017, highlights and lowlights. If anyone has
Any other questions about?
Thank you, Amanda. Successful election. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's slide into the vote by mail update.
Thank you. So we've talked at the last couple of meetings about the RFPs, which has been a huge process of the vote by mail transition project. We've talked in the past about the 2 first RFPs that we've done. We have purchased the Dominion equipment to do the ballot tabulation. We've purchased 3 high-speed scanners along with database system that we will use for ballot creation. Additionally, we have purchased a Bell & Howell signature scanning and ballot envelope sorting solution that is anticipated that it'll be delivered at the end of June, beginning of July, for setup in July. We have some Bell & Howell company representatives that will be traveling to Alaska for that. We've finalized the 3rd RFP, which is for the ballot printing and ballot package compiling component. So when we transition to vote by mail, each registered voter will receive a ballot envelope. Inside that ballot envelope, there will be a ballot, return envelope, and instructions, and a secrecy sleeve. And so we had to go out to bid on which company would compile all that. I don't know if I can at this point disclose who we selected, so I'm not, but we are working with purchasing on that final selection. It's a pretty massive undertaking because the ballot envelope that is mailed has to have that voter's correct address on it, which we pull from the voter registration database. We also have to make sure the appropriate ballot is included with that specific voter in that specific envelope, and we have the 42 roughly different ballot styles each election. Additionally, they have to make sure that the appropriate envelope for return is included, and that is important because there is a barcode on that envelope that comes back to us, and that is what our signature scanning and ballot envelope sorting machine uses. So those two pieces of those two components do need to make sure they're able to talk to each other. And we had some support from Bell and Howell on our RFP team to make sure we were asking the right questions about some of those components of the ballot envelope creation.
Mr. Chairman, you were talking about the ballot envelope has to be the correct one. Let's make sure we tell the public when we're sending the ballot out to them, use only the authorized ballot envelope, because I can see people just getting a white manila envelope or a white envelope, shoving it in there and sending it back to us thinking, hey, I've got it all done.
That's interesting. What happens if that happens?
So anytime something comes back that is out of the ordinary, it's outsorted, and then we would make an effort to contact the voter.
It's going to delay the process.
It's going to delay the
So
process.
if you have an otherwise intact ballot, it just happens to be in a manila envelope from the voter, it would probably be counted, right?
Well, so there's a couple things to consider. Part of the secure system to make sure that we're preventing fraud is the voter's signature that's on the outside of the envelope. And we are conferring that is the voter by comparing that signature to the one that we have on file. And that is a very important component of the vote by mail system. And so if a voter returns an envelope and it's not the appropriate, and there's not a signature on it, that voter is going to need to be contacted.
And we couldn't have them sign the ballot itself because it's a secret ballot.
Correct. And you know, I will say that our code, your code, has included that if a voter does anything to mark their ballot with any identifier, then that ballot's not counted. And we have voters who do that a little bit, where they'll vote on one thing and then they'll want to vote for the other, and they'll cross it out and they'll initial it, because that's what you do on most documents. But this is a way to identify that ballot, and so those won't count. But an important part of our vote by mail transition is if a voter makes a mistake, there are picture instructions on the ballot, because when you're at a polling location, if you make a mistake, you can get a new ballot. But now you'll be able to see that the appropriate way, if you make a mistake, would be to just cross out the wrong one, and then we're able to adjudicate that as part of our Dominion
I think
system.
it's a training process for us as we go through this a couple of times. We'll get it down. The public will know what they're supposed to do. It's just I worry about the first one. It's be a new way to do things.
So what if somebody, and I mean, you know, some of us who have been paying bills and everything through the snail mail for our entire lives, are very used to writing the return address up in the left corner of that envelope. What if somebody just does that? You know, I mean, does that ruin the whole thing, or?
No. So, you know, the things that I think we're most concerned about with the envelope coming back is to make sure that there's the signature on it, that it is in that appropriate envelope that has the barcode, and that there's nothing else in it. So part of the Bell and Howell system is going to weigh each of the envelopes as they go through, and it's going to outsource things that are too heavy or too light. So if there's 2 ballots in an envelope, it's going to outsource it, and we're going to be able to look at that and see what's going on. And that will be part of our education campaign, to make sure that folks know that they need to put it in their own envelope and their own signature. And we see some of this stuff a little bit already. We'll see people in the same households sign the wrong ones, but if we have both of them, then we're able to compare that. And so when those things get outsorted, we'll be able to take a closer look at those things, those challenges.
So when you were down a year or two ago in King County, how many people did they have assigned or hired to call voters that there were questions about their ballot?
So King County is sometimes a little hard to apples to oranges, you know, because they're so big, 1.2 million registered voters. Part of the other challenge is we do not have phone numbers. The voter registration database does not track a voter's phone number. King County's system does.
How many registered voters do we have?
212,000. So we aren't going to be directly able to call them, but our system is set up that when things are getting outsorted, we will be able to send a form letter. So if there is a challenge, it'll create a sort of like an Excel spreadsheet of voters that we need to send a form letter to, and then we'll be able to send those letters out to those voters to cure the challenges that we're seeing.
And so they'll get that letter hopefully within 24 to 48 hours of when we notice there could be a problem, and they'll have time to come in before we finalize the election results.
Absolutely. And so, the voter's not going to need to come. Part of our education outreach is going to be encouraging folks to return their ballot and their envelope when they receive it. The sooner the better, because that way there is the opportunity, if there is challenges, for us to contact the voter and for them to cure those. And it won't just be up until Election Day. They'll have up until before we certify. So if somebody returns their ballot and there's not, the signature is not what we have on file, we'll be able to contact that voter, and they'll have that little bit of extra time to come in. So 2 other things that I wanted to talk about with the vote by mail update on our horizon of what we're working on. We are working on planning a mock election so that we can test all of our system, all of our equipment. We are still sort of in the planning phases of what that's going to look like, but we will definitely be coming back to the assembly to talk about that, about if any assistance that we need with that. But we are anticipating that will be towards the end of September that we will have that mock election, and that will be really crucial for us to test the different pieces of equipment and processing and how it runs and what it looks like, to make sure that as we move forward for April 2018 that we have the appropriate staffing, and that we identify really where we're going to need to have workers.
So this would also be a test for our printer, that whoever gets that contract, to make sure that they're printing everything the way we want it, so that machines all read it correctly and everything. So
Yeah, that's what we're hopeful, that we're able to test with registered voters, that we're able to test the mail out, the return, and test the signature scanning. So, but we are still in, that we have a couple different conversations of exactly how that's going to look. So we're not quite sure, and I anticipate in the next couple of weeks we'll be coming back to the assembly with some more information on that.
something we'll have more information about next month's meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Croft?
I'm really interested in that because it seems both an appropriate test and a potential opportunity for us. How broad were you thinking of making it? What are your current ideas? How large?
I think we have talked between 5,000 and 10,000. I think we because it's a mock election, I'm not sure where you're going, but I just want to say because it's a
Make it
mock
real.
election, I think if there's an opportunity for a real something that's a different conversation outside of the mock election
Kind of
conversation.
a stage up and probably cost more money, but a more real test and could be useful for us is some issue that we're interested in asking about. If it's an advisory vote that you get to test on, it's not as critical. If we do screw up, it's not as big a screw up as screwing up an election.
That's interesting. That's an interim between. I think we had spoken before, and I had spoken with the clerk offline about, let's do an actual, was it sales tax, whatever. Let's do a real election.
That's right.
But that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. We, as the assembly, would have to, put a lot more thought and effort into it. I mean, maybe it's red light cameras or whatever. But I like your idea there. That's sort of in between a smaller mock at the high schools or whatever, and a full-scale sales tax, for example. Something that where we're going to get a big swath of the population for some kind of advisory opinion, basically like a giant poll.
It's a giant poll. I don't really like them usually, but for this, I would so much rather have you work the kinks out on something that is advisory and get your lessons learned. Even if and if that's a discrete amount of money, if that's $50,000 more bucks or $100, that still might be worth doing so that we don't have problems in a real election. That could be a responsible allocation of money, and you staff up for it in a way that's bigger than you thought.
But the problem I foresee is we don't have quite as much time to collect signatures if we're by September versus we have more time to get more signatures by the mayoral election next April.
Both Forrest and I have been feeling around different areas about this, and should have come to you, talked a little bit with Barbara early, but, so, yeah, I wanted, as you're thinking, well, what do you think about all that?
We could also ask questions, sorry to interrupt, but we could also ask questions we couldn't normally ask. Like instead of saying sales tax yes or no, we could ask, would you prefer a sales tax or a gas tax? Would you prefer a gas tax
Stuff on the
or
fiscal plan.
or
for
a
the
bed
state-
tax?
Yeah, stuff that pressures on getting a fiscal plan statewide, has its own issues, and,
Yeah.
but,
Would you also cut this PFD or have an income tax?
You know?
We should ask that.
I'll send Mr. Kendall, he wants to ask a question, moving the capital.
Move the capital.
No, we're not doing that.
Here we go again.
Unsubscribe.
so
Mr. Kendall.
I know I'm buying you, or this discussion is buying you a whole bunch more trouble, but it's also buying you more of a real test, right?
So, a couple things. I think that we're going to be able to get a good sense of the system and equipment with 5,000 to 10,000 ballots, voters participating in the mock election. I am maybe more anxious about some of these more controversial things that are being discussed for an advisory vote, because I think that it's there's more communicating that requires and messaging about what an advisory vote is. And I think if we're going to do an advisory vote, how can you communicate that you're only taking this smaller swath of Anchorage? And so you might need to go out to everyone, which is going to be incredibly expensive. And
What's incredibly expensive? What-
Having a full scale.
No, but what's the number? What order of magnitude number?
it's going to be
100,000 or 1,000,000?
No, it's like
not 1,000,000,
like
not 100.
400,000, right?
Yeah, because there's a cost to each envelope
I get it.
ballot package and mailing, and that alone can run between a couple dollars. So then if you think times 212,
So we're in the 300,000, 400,000
yes,
number?
versus a smaller 5,000 to 10,000 voter.
Okay, then let me just, we're riffing off each other, but is that all right? Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So are there, like, we had various regional questions in this ballot. You talked about the Girdwood and the Indian and the, are there regional questions that are less than the entire city that would be useful, right? That would be just not a test, but what do you want to do on Chugach access? What do you want to do on, that are needed to be answered, but are not the entire city, but are useful and more of a test for you? And that's almost a question for us, right? But
Would Eagle River Chugach like to form their own city?
yeah, there.
So
The
I
state
will
spent $80,000 on that, and the answer was no. Fred Dyson did that.
I think the value of the
They
mock
can't afford
election
it.
is for us to test the system. And I think that to test the system, we're going to be able to run the stuff through both the signature solution and the ballots. I would say that it makes me more apprehensive about having something that's more controversial, or we have to do messaging that it's an advisory vote, or it's harder to communicate that this is just a mock election. So
We're getting out of mock. We're getting into some real.
Can I ask so I know you and Barbara talked about like doing it in the high schools, for example, and Eric just mentioned a region needs a question. How difficult or expensive is it for you to do a randomized, where let's say we're going to send out 5,000 or 10,000 ballots, they're going to be randomly selected from the voter pool, so it's very much like a
People
poll.
we already have signatures from.
Well, I guess that's true, but my point is just you're not doing a full scale, but I assume it would cost a little bit more than going into a high school. But how difficult or expensive is it to do that kind of randomization?
I think that we could set it up that we randomly select folks. One thing that we've talked about too is if we're looking for 5,000 voters, we could reach out to our municipal employees 3,000 to participate in a mock election, or school district employees to participate in a mock election, and that we know we're able to look at registered voters and that are.
Again, we're playing off each other, but if we got 200,000 voters, we say do 10% of them.
Yeah.
Just blah. And that if it's the same turnout, and I hope for bigger turnout, if it's a quarter turnout, we'll get 5,000 back out of 20,000 sent out. Again, I'm hoping vote by mail gets you more, but then you're in the order of magnitude that you wanted, and it's sort of a souped up poll.
Well, yeah, I mean, polls, you can get very close to, a 2 or 3% margin of error with just a couple thousand people. I mean, that's how statistics work. If we were to do a 5 or 10,000 person, that would actually give a very good sense of where the whole city stood on something. If your randomization was done appropriately, you weren't systematically
Right.
selecting one kind of person or eliminating one kind of person. I don't know if taking people with signatures would do that.
Yeah. So I hear what everyone's saying, and I just think I am grateful for this conversation. But one thing to consider is we are working on the education and outreach about vote by mail in general, and I think we want to keep a very tight mock election, because if we're randomly sending things out across the city, we're going to need to do a pretty big education and outreach campaign about who's getting these items and how to respond, where if we have a very tight group where we can email every municipal employee.
But that's also where, if you had a controversial issue, you get a ton of earned media. The newspapers would cover it, KTU would cover it. People would know, there's like a super poll going on. I wonder if I'm going to be one of the 10,000.
You could ask a question, do we want to break the school district up into vote by district? That's coming from us many times before.
Yeah, I mean, something like
versus overall running.
Do we want to close a particular high school? And you will get a ton of interest, and everybody will know what's happening, and we won't have to pay anybody.
The thing is, they'd be scared that we were serious about closing that high school.
Right.
So
That's not
That is-
what I want to
that
do.
is the
they'd be bringing- some people would be
challenge.
bringing pitchforks.
Yeah.
So-
Well, the twin goals is
Avoid that
having this
cross.
test be as useful for you troubleshooting as possible. So as, in that sense, as real and not as fake as municipal employees or a school question. And the possibility of it being useful for us, asking a non-mock but advisory or even real questions. So those are the twin goals for me, that it be a useful test in terms of your troubleshooting, and a test, if we're going to test, that provides some information of relevance to us. Now, I know those two goals add a little danger and complexity to your life, but it seems like they're worth pursuing. The closer we can get you to what you're going to have to face in real time and with real consequences coming up, and getting us something that of value, are worth a little trouble and a little cost. Of course, I'm not the one that has the trouble.
But we were ones that have to write the check.
Do you have something
I
to
just have an overall question for her. What's your no-go date on the 2018 election? What is your date? I want to know, so as we start to work to that date, I want to know what we've got to do to make it happen or not.
move backwards?
We have not set a no-go date yet.
Okay,
I
would
will
you
say
guys
that we
figure it
are
out for us,
making really great progress on all of the major deliverables that we are anticipating. So we have the equipment being delivered, and we have completed the final RFP. We are working really diligently on the signature scanning solution. We have a worker, and essentially where Barbara is right now, we have folks down at the election center that are actually scanning the precinct registers. And so we are making great steps and strides
I know,
towards
I hope you're
2018.
successful.
But
It's just a matter, there has to be a date out there. Either we go forward with it or we kill it off
Yeah.
and redo it. So you have to tell us at some point in time, what's the date?
Okay, I think I do not know the answer to that, and I will say that I think we
That's fine, just-
have a little bit of time before it'll be really clear. But we will get back to you at the next meeting with a specific.
Well, I would think that we would need to know that when we put our budget together. Wouldn't we? I mean,
Yeah.
because would it be a different budget for us if we're voting?
For a poll-based
Voting by
versus
mail
mail-in.
versus poll-based? I imagine there's a difference in expense there.
Just we have to talk about it at some point in time,
Right.
like we to work on it.
And so we're trying to figure out who to send the test ballots, the test election out to. How many people do we already have that typically vote absentee, or vote by mail? Do we have 5,000 now? Or?
So like 3,000.
It fluctuates year to year, and so sometimes we've seen in the 2015 election, we saw strong participation, vote by mail. And this past year, we had about 3,300 voters request a ballot by mail.
So you think you might have 5,000 signatures from people who voted in the last 2 or 3 elections?
We have signatures from a lot of different areas, and we've been harvesting signatures for a long time. But voters, since 2015, when the state got its new voter registration database, they have been tracking
A friend of mine proposed it.
signatures from question voters, absentee voters, when people make updates. So we do have those, and then we've saved our poll books from the last couple elections. So we are grabbing those signatures as part of the scanning project right now. So I think in the next couple weeks, we'll have a good sense of exactly where we're at with those signatures.
Percentage-wise,
Yeah.
what the percentage of the total number of
Yeah.
registered voters is. Okay. All right, additional comments, questions,
I have-
thoughts?
Handled everything I wanted.
Just something for my colleagues to think about. I have spoken with Barbara on what Eric brought up about, what if we want to do a real mock election? $300,000-$400,000. It might be worth it though to raise funds for the Seward Highway patrols, for example. And she expressed to me that it's going to take them a number of months to get ready for the 2018 election. And that means that they can't do this mock election too close to the other election. So, and it takes us a couple of months to get things onto the ballot. So you start working backwards from there. And our decision point for passing something to go on this ballot is like July, I think. I mean, it's soon. So if we're serious about it, we need to start thinking about what exactly it is and making substantive steps towards doing it.
Right. Well, and, I was thinking about the mock election with the high schools type of thing, and we would not have collected very many of those signatures, but you could actually have all the seniors' names, would just be polling the senior class or something, I'm assuming. And then they
Voter
could sign
registration
in next to their name when they drop their ballot in the ballot box or whatever. And when we'd have the signature, we could feed those into our machine and then count the ballots. I thought that would be a fairly easy way to sort of make it happen.
Yeah.
I don't know, just throwing it out there.
Pete,
Yeah.
like I was saying, be a good chance to do voter registration too. All the seniors, most of them are turning 18. That way you get them, do a mock election, but you also get them signed up to vote.
The Department of Elections is, because the PFD voter effective date was March 1st, they are registering everyone who signed up for the PFD after March 1st this year. By this time next year, we should have the signature of almost every person in the state. I mean, unless they're not sharing that with you.
No, if they're incorporating it into the voter registration database, we'll have those.
Yeah, but the PFD deadline is until March 31st, I believe, and our election date is what day in April next year?
April.
6th or 5th or something?
Right. Right. No, I'm saying
So-
this time next year after the mayoral election,
That's pretty.
We'll have all
we'll have
that.
all of them. Yeah, the time didn't work out quite.
So, associated question, but Barbara and I were talking at the meeting about her being on the committee for the state. And
That's where she spent a couple days this week, I think, doing that.
I mean, it's not our business except when the state's lack of getting its business together falls on us in all kinds of ways that we're familiar with. But I'm worried they're going to come late to the realization that they can save money this way, that their machines would, I mean, they know, but how much it's percolated up to the legislative level
Yeah.
of how bad the machines are and how few elections they have going. And it's both a potential collapse of that, or them trying to do vote by mail in a much less organized way, and possibly coming to us as the largest entity that has done it and asking for help. So sort of getting ahead of their potential incompetence or crisis. I mean, one permutation is they come to us and ask us to do it or help them do it. Another is, so I don't know, and Barbara's just in the beginnings of those discussions, but, you know, we're getting off the machines that they should be getting off in time, and they're going to do one more cycle, right? They're going to do 18 on them. And in your opinion, that's sketchy, doable?
20-year-old machines.
Right. I mean, it's stretching
She's
it, I
right.
know.
Who uses a Casio computer anymore? Even knows they were made at one time.
What's a Casio?
They broke-
Yeah.
You had when your parents got you one little tiny thing.
No, I mean, they'll come to us. 2020, they'll come to us.
Well, but think of 2020, because Barbara and I were doing the math sort of backwards. Okay, so the legislature's dealing with fiscal plan now. So they're not going to, even if they all realized at the end of this session, we got to do this,
Right.
it would be a bill in 18 that would pass in summer of 18.
Right.
Even if they got their stuff together and had a Road to Damascus epiphany all at once, it's not going to be law until middle of 18, giving them a year and a half where we spent 3 years getting ours set up.
Yeah, we'll have the machines ready to go. They'll run it through our machines.
But
Well, but not in Queefluck, or not, not in, and so they've got challenges that we don't. We're relatively
We're in an urban area.
Yeah,
We're not. They're urban
tight.
and rural.
But that's why we're doing it by mail. I mean, people in Queefluck will just mail their ballots to Anchorage.
okay, but so maybe
So you gotta
but it's
produce
Fairbanks and Cordova and blah blah blah. I mean, it's a lot
that
more
language.
complicated than us doing it.
But they do
Or you
have
gotta
postal
produce
service
it
in
in the
all
language
parts of
those
Alaska,
people
I
speak.
believe. The U.S. Post Office operates in the entire state.
Okay, but even in our state, we're doing 12 drop boxes, and so that's complicated, right? 4 was kind of, 12 is complicated. Imagine getting all the drop boxes from every major hub.
There just won't be drop boxes in most places.
There's going to have to be at least a Bethel. Anyway, let's just say it's more complicated than us.
Yeah.
And we took 3 years to do, and I think we're more on top of it. So how is the state in a year and a half going to do the more complicated half of this equation?
Yeah, well, so they're going to try to figure out where we're going to get the $4 or $5 million or whatever it is to buy new machines.
Well, it's
So-
the rough numbers Barbara was talking about is, $1 million versus $6 million doing this. So you can almost in 1 year make your equipment nut and save your money.
Yeah.
Ish.
Well, Barbara and I have been talking about us becoming a contractor for the state. That's always been the intention.
Right.
Once we get this working correctly, we can talk to the boroughs in the state of Alaska. We have the equipment set up, it works.
I love it, and we can make a little money, or
Make
we
a
can
little
just
money.
help them do.
Cover the cost of our overhead at least. You know.
But I'm worried they dump that on us in a way we can't handle. And they can't handle, because the machines then are, like 2020, if that's really drop dead on their machines, and they don't realize it till a year and a half in, we can't handle it. We have to decide, I guess, whether we're going to help them solve a problem they don't quite yet know they
No,
have.
they have. They have to know those machines are just dying. I mean,
Right, they know it at some level. I just don't know how high the level is.
And, the fact that we're on the road system and can send somebody out to the pole in 15 or 20 minutes,
Right.
with a card or whatever, we have an advantage. If you're out off the road system and it's a 3-hour flight from the nearest spot or 2 hours or whatever, they're in big trouble, And I'm sure that has to have happened before.
It has to happen before, and it's going to happen more and more, probably.
So it becomes a logistic nightmare for the state. So, anyway, our hour has come and gone, and I'm wondering if we have
Thank you.
any other member comments or old business that anyone wants to bring up.
Move to adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned now.